All right, Ben, Dan, how are both your mornings going?
Great.
Doing great, Uni. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well. Any plans coming up for the holidays as we're waiting for folks to join and start talking about agents?
Let's see. I guess one interesting thing is they just put in a new park in Charleston, and it is absolutely beautiful. It looks very
Nice.
New York-esque. I will send you both a picture just for fun after this. And it just opened about 2 weeks ago, and if that doesn't get you in the holiday spirit, nothing will.
Awesome. I didn't realize our webinar, Dan, was sponsored by the Charleston Tourist Department, but they are welcome to. uh, that's awesome. We actually in San Francisco and Ben, I don't know if you've been down near Oracle Park. If for anyone who's listening who's in San Francisco, there is now gorgeous new Shoreline Park too. That kind of has a cool feel, feels pretty different than other parks, and so love when cities go and spin up great public infrastructure. Uh, Awesome. Well, as folks join, we are here today to go talk about agents. So, one quick housekeeping note is for anyone who is attentive, you're probably noticing that Anthony Alvernaz, who is our co-founder and our chief product officer, has been swapped for Ben Sheridan, who runs product also on our team, is also deeply involved in AI, and I think is going to be a really great voice for this conversation as someone who worked in accounting and now goes and works in product. So, really interesting perspective to have. So I will go ahead and share my screen and ask folks to confirm as we join. But to make sure our chat is working, and let me actually go in and make sure our settings are good, I would love for folks to begin and post in the chat. There we go. I think everyone should be able to. Where they are calling from and the best park in their city. Because it feels right, because we've just talked about parks. So if anyone wants to throw in, Jesse, thank you for starting it off with you either from Yo or the parks from Yo, you're saying hello. Either way, all good. So if folks go in and begin to start chatting, that would be helpful. Okay. So as we get things started here, as I mentioned, goal of our webinar today is I think everyone has seen a whole slew of words surrounding AI thrown out, whether that be agent or AI enabled or AI powered or any of the other alphabet soup of God knows what that has been slung around in accounting. And Dan and Ben are here today to really share with us what is an agent? What does that actually mean for accounting teams? How should you be thinking about evaluating agents? And we'll wrap it up with a Q&A in case we don't cover any of the core questions that folks have. So our agenda is we're going to start with some intros, give you an introduction to Dan and Ben here. We're going to then go share what is an agent from shared understanding between Dan and Ben. Would love to also hear for folks who are actively sort of using agents in their own workflows, how they think about that as well. So feel free to add to the chat. We'll then cover perspectives on agents. So RightRev and Numeric, both as companies that have leaned into how can we build better with AI and do it intentionally, are going to share how they think about AI. And then we'll talk about how then do you evaluate agents in the wild when you are actively making a software decision, wrap up with what we think is ahead of the future and get into Q&A. So we got a packed hour. We'll sort of try to run through whatever is most helpful. If we are saying things that you disagree with, you agree with, again, love to see interaction in the chat. So let's kick it over, and I will stop talking and turn it over to Dan and Ben for introductions. So Dan, tell us a little bit about your background and RightRev.
I am Dan Miller. I'm the CFO of RightRev. But on the first slide, you had me as the CFO of Numeric too. So that was
Oh,
pretty cool. I didn't know that. Anthony, we'll have to talk to him about that. Um, so actually, I do think it's really cool. I just was sort of thinking about Ben and I. So Ben is an accountant that has become a product guy. I'm a CPA and accountant, CFO currently as well, but really spend most of my time with customers, probably 25% of my time being CFO of RightRev, and then 75% of my time really out doing demos, helping customers, etc. So I hope that is good fodder for a discussion about what we're seeing from different perspectives. So what is RightRev? RightRev is really, we're your revenue recognition experts in terms of really the domain, in terms of the technical accounting, but also obviously automating that process. And what's interesting about that is in order to do revenue well, you have to be able to do a whole bunch of other things really well. You have to know quoting and CPQ. You have to know billing. And probably most interesting in terms of just kind of taking off the accounting hat and putting on our business hats is that you have to know pricing and packaging and monetization, which is a super hot topic today. We'll talk about it a bit here. Before I was CFO of RightRev, where I've been for 4 years, I was also CFO of Fastly, a very early sort of pioneer in the usage consumption model. Before that, I was vice president of finance and general manager at NetSuite, and in that role was very focused, as you can imagine, on the back office as well. So I'm a CPA, 30 years in San Francisco. I now live in Charleston, South Carolina. Looking forward to the discussion. Ben.
Awesome. Well, Dan, super excited to be here with you today talking about what I think is a really interesting topic. Just to share a little bit more detail about myself, I did start my career in accounting as a CPA as well. I was in the Big Four at KPMG, focusing on venture-backed tech audit, S1 filings, first-year SOX. From there, I moved to Snowflake, where I was the revenue accounting and operations manager for a good period of time there. And now I am at Numeric as a accounting subject matter expert in the product org, bringing a lot of the insight both into where operations need to improve, what accountants are striving for, but then also where the compliance risk lies and how we want to think about covering our bases and giving people the tools to really succeed end to end with an AI accounting use case. So really excited to be here, and thank you for the intro, Tierney.
Of course. All right. So, with our two great panelists introed, we're going to kick things off with what is an agent, which we will be the first ones to admit there's not really a shared definition. So, as we get into this, Dan, maybe a little bit of context on what people are sort of seeing around them in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, and I think we have a technical definition later, at least one. I think I saw a completely different one this morning to your point, Tierney. The point of this slide is very simple from at least from our perspective, is I think this is the FOMO thing that we accountants are worried about. What are we missing? Oh my gosh, I'm not using AI that much. Everybody else is using AI. My skill set is getting, stale. I'm not going to be employable. I'm not going to be current. I'm not going to be helping my company. All of that. Um, and what I'm here to tell you, at least from our perspective, and actually perhaps more, I guess, from a larger scale and a broader lens, is a study came out on Friday led by Stanford, Berkeley, and IBM and others. A wonderful, sort of set of participants did a survey of 306 accountants and back office folks and IT folks. And really, the prevalence is still very low, and the use cases are very simple. But growing quickly. And I think we're all excited about this area, to be super clear. And we at RightRev are investing heavily as well. But in terms of just kind of all these headlines that you see, a lot is happening, and very quickly. It doesn't take a genius to realize that. But in terms of the deployments, I think maybe we'll put a link in the notes or something, but there's a really great study that was just done on Friday. And as I say, in 2 weeks, it could be totally different data, the way this is moving very quickly. But at the moment, I think the FOMO thing is probably more hype than actual reality. But we'll get into some of the reality as we go through here. It's super exciting. So that's my thoughts on that.
Absolutely. We will follow up with the link to that in our follow-up email. And Ben, I think maybe to speak on why is it just hype?
Yeah. So a really interesting report came out from MIT on AI deployments, and you'll notice some pretty stark figures on the slide here indicating that, we're still kind of early on in the process of figuring out the right way to operationalize AI, and especially in larger, more mature businesses or industries with a high degree of complexity. And a few things that actually jumped out in the details of, why did we have such a low ROI were actually quite interesting. One thing that did get called out was essentially the attempt to use AI was misordered, meaning people were trying to automate intelligence before automating their basic operations. We'll see it a lot through the course of this presentation, but there's a dependency, of course, on the quality of the data and also the consistency of the data and the guardrails around the use of AI to really get consistent, accurate results, which are going to be critical, obviously, in a finance and accounting use case. So I think people are still learning uh, generally where to order, where to layer AI into their processes, and also are exposing maybe some gaps in the existing legacy workflows that they have on which the AI would depend.
All right.
If I could boil that down to just
Yeah.
so, which was great. It's almost as if you really, if you're doing an AI project, you should make sure that your process that you're defining, the work that you're doing works without the AI, but maybe not as well as it someday will with the AI. And I think if you think about it that way, you're sort of, I mean, at least you have a backup plan if you don't get the ROI or there's not a successful project.
100%.
Absolutely. Which gets into a little bit of some of the issues today, which Dan and Ben, we talked about some of these. Any that you want to call out that you've seen in conversations with customers?
Ben, I'll defer to you if you'd like.
Sure, I'm happy to start here. I actually kind of want to parlay into the prior slide a little bit on that third point at the bottom there. Um, there is a risk of AI debt where misplaced reliance might snowball and create a misstatement or an error. But I would also note that what we just said earlier also suggests that a premature deployment of AI might also expose operational debt. There are certain things that you might not be able to get around that are just fundamental to running a business correctly. As you mentioned earlier, Dan, structuring your pricing, structuring your product catalog, building controls around your vendor selection. Um, these are the sorts of things I think that can actually also provide the rigid and proper data that will make AI work. Um, and I'd note also on the exactness point, we're seeing this a lot in our cash matching use case, where, like for us, AI is probabilistic in suggesting rules which might be successful in the engine. But ultimately, when we run these rules and do the cash matching, it's deterministic software, which is creating the accounting and which is known to execute correctly in the same way every time. And we'll get into that in a little more detail in subsequent slides, but those are two that kind of jump out to me immediately as pretty interesting.
I love that because one and two are the ones we talk about a lot at RightRev, which is and we're going to talk more about this, but the probabilistic thing works. I think if you're, for example, if you're doing an accrual for travel and expense, like directional is probably good. You want to get better over time, obviously, but and so agents are probably a good use case there, and probably even more specific than even that broad category. Um, but in revenue recognition, we don't find people are wanting to hand wave at getting it sort of right. And obviously, the auditors aren't anywhere near that. So rules-based, deterministic is where we're still at. We'll talk about some of the use cases in and around what works, but exactness really matters. And we do not find any of our prospects or customers really very interested in sort of estimating that. The second piece is around, and I love this. This is actually back to the consumption model. We being the revenue recognition effort. If you have simple revenue recognition, if you have simple offerings, if you have a simple way to monetize, good for you. I have a buddy of mine's the CIO of a very, very, very large cybersecurity company. And I asked him, what are you guys doing usage? No, I don't have to. We are in a situation where our customers will buy in a very simple sort of pricing and packaging model. That's not everybody. And as we move forward, I think I saw something by 2028, all of the new offerings, but 75% of the new offerings will be on a consumption basis. And so that complexity is, by the way, it does increase with scale, and I think this slide is correct. But what we're seeing is that complexity move down
Mm.
earlier into companies' life cycles because they want to monetize and they want to provide solutions to their customers. It may be a managed service offering with usage, subscription, hardware, professional services, everything else. And if that's the way their customer wants to buy, they're going to sell that way because it's better for them, obviously, and it's stickier and everything else. So anyway, I think the slide's right, but we are also seeing sort of the opposite in the sense of complexity moving down to earlier in a company's life.
That's
Yeah,
super
I
helpful.
I also think there's something almost ironic about a lot of that trend is because of AI too, with a lot of the consumption-based models where
Exactly.
so there is a bit of a lot of the complexity that is actually the need for rules-based is coming from these AI companies. So want to make it clear, even with everything we just said around questions, around use case, around being really thoughtful, this is a room full of people who are optimists about what is possible and are really excited about the text. So let's turn to what is possible, what is an agent, and Ben, want to kick us off of how you think about what is an agent?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll note for the audience here that our thought and definition at Numeric of what makes an AI agent is covered somewhat in that purple square down at the bottom right. We really care that we can own the outcome, that we have the proper guardrails, structure, and context, and also give folks the tools to audit these outputs before deploying them. Say again, for example, in the cash matching example. The rest of these squares here are kind of what we don't think an AI agent is. But I kind of want to zoom out from that a little bit and just differentiate between like, putting input or prompt into an LLM and an agentic workflow. I like to think of it as like a very simple workflow might be if I have an LLM and I give it access to my Google Calendar and I say, hey, when is my next meeting with this person? And it might give me an answer. It is doing some work with me, but constrained by the tools I give it. In that same context, if I give it a broad array of tools and the license to reason and action through that array of tools on its own to answer more sophisticated questions, you're getting to a higher degree of agency and a more agentic uh, workflow. And so in accounting and finance, I think having some degree of control over what data sources I give it access to, what context it's allowed to operate on, and then also where in that process do I layer in my deterministic software, human in the loop review kind of creates a more proper workflow. And so there's a lot of different flavors of this and kind of hybrid versions of it. But I think that, again, like the cash matching example I give is one great one, where we do have a variety of data sources and tools that the AI can look to, but ultimately that output is subject to human review and then also goes through a deterministic software program to perform the accounting and propose the matches. Um, so I'll pause there as well. Dan, if you had any thoughts you wanted to
Good
on.
stuff. I have a couple things. One is I agree, and I actually saw Kurt's comment. The more specific the agent, that's what we're seeing work today. You sort of have these things trying to do too much. It's tough, and so the baby steps resonated with me. And then I think we're going to get into the different type of agents, but just the Ben, as you were talking a bit about the data and the data sources. There's autonomous, there's context aware, and so we're super interested in some of those categories in particular. And I could tell you we're ways away from the autonomous for a whole bunch of reasons we'll get into, but the context aware is super interesting. So I love what you said about the data sources, and maybe we'll come back to that.
Cool. And this kind of summarizes a little bit of what we more or less what we just said. So essentially, the more agentic the workflow is, the more control and determination the AI has over what tools, what data it uses to respond to a given prompt.
All right. Well, with that grounding into what is an agent, this idea of having a toolkit really at its disposal and using reasoning, we're going to jump into Numeric and RightRev's perspectives on AI, perspectives on agents, and how we think about how that fits into accounting. And a word has already been thrown around by both Dan and Ben that probably needs some explaining, which is deterministic. Well, what is that, Ben? And for folks who might not be aware, what is sort of the contrast to that?
Yeah, when I think of this contrast here, what I would say is deterministic is like legacy software when you know what the code is written, you know the logic as structured, and you can validate the execution of it. You have a known, repeatable, consistent output of that program. Where when I think of inference and I think of AI and LLMs, you don't have always the same insight into how this is going to run, the second, third, fourth, fifth time I run it. And so it's not necessarily going to always give me the same answer every single time, but it can take context, data, and tools, and it can infer and it can give me useful insights that I might then run through a more deterministic uh, program, if that makes sense. And so, when you think about like a flux analysis, for example, um, it can take the context that I give it and give me interesting insights into my business. It can read that data, it can summarize it. But with slight variations in the data that it receives or in the context that I give it, I'm going to potentially get different output. So knowing where I think to marry these things in an accounting and finance process is really where you can get some great results. I've talked a lot about cash matching, but you could also think about this in terms of like a data migration. Like if you have really unstructured or inconsistent data, PDF documents and the like, and you might want to move these into a new system, using some of that inference to take a first pass at restructuring, bringing things into a known format that will then run through your deterministic software tool, maybe like an accounting automation, um, is a great use case. And now you might still need to manually review that data, and your aggregate amount of work time might not go down as much as you think it will, but you're not the one punching numbers into a spreadsheet. And so you get more time to validate, to review, and to ultimately, I think, achieve a higher degree of accuracy.
Can I add
Awesome.
something?
Yeah, totally, Dan.
Thank you. Sorry. So, I mean, that was
Anytime.
awesome. Because we call it the deterministic model really rules based, and as everybody I think most know that at least have been in and around RevRec, it's rules based, right? It's there's the 5 steps and all of that sort of stuff. It gets super interesting, by the way, with some of these sort of credit based models that you're seeing with all of the AI companies. And obviously that's super important. Couple of things on that, on the problem, but we do find on the revenue side, it's similar to what Ben talked about in terms of some of the probabilistic sort of recommendation things. So for example, if you have a new SKU and you say, wow, cool, we got a new SKU and let's imagine it's scale, and that's happening quite a bit. Our capability, our agentic approach is to say, okay, great, look at the other similar SKUs, do the analysis, and make a recommendation around what that rule should be. So it's a really nice sort of use of both of those for where they're good, and where they're appropriate. And finally, I would add, I just saw this. I couldn't provide it to Tierney beforehand. I saw it in a presentation, but IBM has done some really basic research and starting to look at ways for AI to actually sort of converge some of the accuracy of the probabilistic to get close enough, maybe where these will, now this is not ready for prime time or even really near for production, but if that world starts to happen, you start to get pretty excited about, hey, maybe I don't need to make a choice anymore. Maybe, using materiality back to our audit days is good enough so that you can use AI to do some things that formerly you needed to do sort of on the deterministic angle. So anyway, just some thoughts there.
I love it. Dan, it's so clear you wake up every morning and you're reading the digests that are coming out every day. I love the student mindset.
There's nothing else to do in Charleston, so this is it.
You go to the park, you read the AI recaps. There we go. Awesome. Well, Ben, I think kind of related to that, like I would love for you to talk about how we think about it as like a tool in the toolkit.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say like, taking the example of anomaly detection, like under a legacy process with no AI whatsoever, I might be doing sample tests. And I, by the way, am likely still going to do that for a given accounting process for a given month-end close, where I have like system reliance and automations in place where I want to ensure that my business scenarios are, running and executing correctly. Um, but you don't really, as a human, have the ability to do a 100% review at scale or at volume. And so even though I might still have these procedures and controls, which are SOX compliant, um, I kind of love the feeling of peace and comfort that comes if I also have AI do a 100% review on top of the work I'm doing, um, and kind of go through these anomalies and see, oh, is there anything I missed? Are there rules or policies or procedures that I'm not thinking about, edge cases that I'm not considering, and kind of help me better actually understand some of the details of my operations. Um, So like, that's one place where again, like there are plenty of legacy processes and procedures in what I just described. So far, far from it that AI is the only tool, but it's a really helpful and important one. And I think in that context, again, in accounting, we're so risk averse, worried about the catastrophic outcome, errors and such. In that case, AI could only help, right? Like I'm layering it on top of all the proper things I'm already doing, getting back to that point of getting my business operations in order first, and then um, bringing AI in as an appropriate tool. We talked a little bit of, on the summarization point as well, with data migrations, if you have unstructured or differently structured data, getting that into a right place again, where I still recommend a degree of review, and I certainly also recommend, deterministic software for the ultimate performance of the accounting that comes out of that. But again, the alternative would be a very manual process, which is also fraught with error. I think that's kind of a funny trend, really, that you see in audit and in accounting general, is there's still this kind of comfort to say, well, the human review, I can validate that. I can see the sign off in the Excel spreadsheet. I can, reperform that. But it is kind of assumes that the human review is somehow 100% accurate, which is not true. And I think that becomes less true, especially when you're really focused on the data entry and transformation in a more manual sense. And so I think when you free up that time to be in a review capacity versus a preparation capacity, your accuracy is going to go way up. Um, so I think of AI as a force multiplier, but it's not the silver bullet that's going to fix broken operations, at least not today.
All right. And then finally, Ben, to touch on what does this look like a little bit more concretely in the product? Give folks some examples of what this looks like in Numeric, at least.
Yeah. On the left there, you'll see what we call monitors. And so monitors as a product allows you to put definitions, conditions, and operators to say, hey, where, you know, transaction amount is above X and account is software expense, flag that transaction, and then you will either dismiss it or suggest that maybe this needed to be handled through prepaids, or maybe we had a fixed asset that went straight through expense. Just one example, but basically flagging high risk transactions for people to review. You can create these monitors manually by putting in these conditions based on your understanding of the business. But we also have the ability to automate the creation of these monitors using AI. So you can use natural language to request a certain type of monitor, and the AI will draft and spin it up for you. And what's nice is you can actually look at these fields and conditions and validate that, yes, this makes sense. I agree that this is something I want to keep track of and watch for, and then deploy it. And from there, it's going to run deterministically and read your transaction lines, and flag those which meet these data conditions. But you have an assistant there to help you come up with and improve the monitors that you're running in the software. Um, Similarly with cash, I mentioned earlier that ours is a rules-based engine. And again, you are able to create your own rules. But say in a given month, that you notice a series of manual matches that you've had to make. And you are having a hard time figuring out what rule might capture some or most of these. That's a place where you can leverage AI and say, hey, look at these actual examples. I did a manual match based on these conditions. I did a manual match based on these. Propose or draft a rule that will cover these scenarios in the future so that they automatically match. And we're seeing really amazing success with that. Some companies reaching match rates exceeding 90% automatically. Similarly, on the reporting and Flux side of things, we can spin up Flux reports, income statements, balance sheets, also using AI input. And again, in a similar sense, it doesn't just create a table that you're looking at. You also have complete visibility into the metrics, groupings, filters that flow into this report, and ultimately still have confirmation and validation that it is pulling your whole transaction line detail from NetSuite. And so it will be complete and accurate. It is auditable. It is reviewable. And then lastly, on the Flux, our product also has the ability to read these transactions and write a Flux explanation. You, the user, have some control over the context and data aside from what it grabs from NetSuite. to add attachments, to add supporting files. So really good use cases there and hitting at that point of being governable and auditable.
Awesome. And to briefly hit on this, because I want to keep us on track for time, is I think this is also a chief example of where essentially that tool selection comes into play. So Ben, any quick comments on this slide on like how the concept of tools operates with our Flux writer to give folks some context and how we think about what's an agent?
Absolutely. And I'll keep it fairly fast since we were just talking about the Flux. But if you think about the NetSuite transaction line sync, that is like a data ingest, and that is not a function of AI. And so you'll see that we have the deterministic code there marked on those first three rows. And so the process of getting the data into the system and pivoting and structuring it in the Flux report is not necessarily what any work that AI is doing. But the user providing additional context, running maybe a report out of Salesforce or, iterating with the Flux analysis is what we would call the human review step. But the reading of these transaction lines and the ingestion of this context to create like a draft Flux explanation is where AI really comes in and speeds up the process for people. Then again, at the end, you have this human review step. So this is sort of one of those examples of like a somewhat agentic AI workflow, but with elements of deterministic code and human review.
All right, so we have our example from perspective and examples in the Numeric product from Ben. Dan, turn it over to you. How does the RightRev team think about agents and AI application in your space?
Yeah, I alluded to this slide already earlier, so I think we can really go to the next slide, which really is around context is everything. And so I mentioned this a little bit earlier. And the bad news when you're right, Rev, is you're at the bottom of a very complex and long process, which is from pricing and packaging, you're quoting, you're going to the contract, you got to bill, you got to collect. And then you finally get to us, and there we are waiting with bated breath for your data so that we can do revenue recognition. And we link with all sorts of systems and whatnot. And the point really here is that Aaron was making here at the bottom. We made this 2 or 3 weeks ago, which was context is everything. The agent with the best data, assuming that you can execute on your building of your agents. But the agent with the best data is going to be the most powerful agent and the most capable agent. And that's what we're excited about is we see everything. And so when you get in, and I'm not going to do the RevRec geek out thing, I'm just going to say when you get to the 5 steps of RevRec that actually can shuffle around in order, you really we're the only ones with that information. And so when you start to think about the power of those agents that we have, it gets really interesting. And so I think that's the point here. Again, I think we're a ways away from of the autonomous stuff. I see Kurt making a lot of point around data and how to get to it and how to clean it up. We're working on a whole bunch of stuff there as well. But in terms of just what we can get and what we can see, I think the point is whether you're numeric or whether you're NetSuite or whether you're Snowflake or whoever it is, you are in a situation where the best and cleanest data does get you there, and especially as this world moves to more context-aware agents.
Absolutely. Which gets us into a little bit of to Dan's last point, how do we think about evaluating whether or not an agent is the right thing for a particular workflow? How do we think about evaluating the whole new class of software that has come out that is agentic, that is AI enabled? And so that it made sense to incorporate, given the amount of customer facing time that both of you have, to speak to how do we think about evaluating AI and agents in accounting. And so whoever wants to kick us off here, of we'd sort of begun with these three questions, then have some other principles.
Ben, I'll go first. I'm going to start left to right, and just a little insight for those of you who have done order to cash retransformations, digital transformations. It really is all about the data. We spend at least half of our time, if not more, depending on the situation, just getting the data cleaned up and getting it into a spot where we can then digest it. hence my earlier slide around what that all looks like and why it is not simple from a flow perspective. And that's really that is highlighted and enhanced and perhaps even more urgent as a result of if we move and as we move into an AI world, is that's even more important. And without getting into our roadmap and everything else we're working on, but there is a ton of work. Again, I'll just kind of curt in the comments, which is we're doing a bunch of work to sort of think about how to do that within our product. Certainly great that there are other databases and other capabilities out there that do that. We'll leverage that. In our case, we're built on a Snowflake stack, but really bring that together and bring that data in a way that is sequenced properly with great hygiene. And therefore, when we run it through our engine, I don't want to say it's simple because that engine is super powerful and super complicated, but you actually get the answers and the outcomes that you're looking for that can then be, maybe to Ben's point, sort of auditable all the way back through. And we'll get into this on the next slide, so I don't want to steal the thunder, but and very auditable and reliable. So that's my comment on this.
Yep. I think that's great. And I'll only add on the data foundation side, I think a question I ask a lot of AI providers is, do you have a capability or tool to make it easy for your user to validate that, the data that entered this system is the same as what's represented in the output? I think a lot of times, especially in accounting and finance, teams find themselves doing that validation in an Excel spreadsheet or somewhere else. And so from my perspective, I think that's like one space where, this can continue to improve over time. I think that a lot of that work, review, and validation can be automated, or at least parts of it certainly can. And so I think as AI kind of comes more to the forefront of the compliance world, as auditors get more comfortable with it, as auditors themselves start to use it, some of this self-validation, I think will be really interesting to see. But overall, I agree with everything Dan said, and as it's represented on the slide as well.
All right. So moving into, we are now actively evaluating a set of AI tools. What are some red flags or things to really stay aware of as we think about how do we make the right choices, given the new sort of cadre of tools that are coming out pretty much every week, it seems.
Yeah. Ben, are you okay? I mean, I have probably a lot. I'm going to be the grumpy old guy on this. This is my grumpy old guy slide. I'll start at the bottom. We see technologies trying to say they can do a whole lot of things they can't do, and it's actually quite dangerous. We live in a world, in terms of the revenue and order to cash world, we live in a world where 80% of the transactions are actually usually pretty simple to process. It doesn't take a complex tool to do some of those. And so it's always about the 20%, and the 20% is really, really hard. And by the way, that 20% fluctuates. It becomes 25, it becomes 30% as you're doing new offerings and as all of those changes come through and you have to digest through and those through your business processes and your systems. And so when we see a vendor say we can do all of that magically, we say demo it. And that gets to sort of the second part, which is demo it, run through each of your use cases. We actually had a fairly large customer, like 500 million in revenue, kind of hand wavy through the use case thing. We stepped back and we just said, look, we need to be really specific here. And then, by the way, this is not necessarily even AI related. We need to be really specific about your use cases. I don't want to get into implementation and be having a failed implementation because you have lack of clarity around your process. And then we're having to sort of scramble to figure it out. And then the last piece, which again applies with AI and without, but particularly sort of really enhanced, is the black box. And it gets to my earlier comment about auditability and Ben's as well. Black boxes don't work in RevRec now. They really won't work with AI. And so really kind of that ability to really transparently see how the calculations are done, in our case, very complicated in many cases, particularly if you get into contract modifications and other complexities. It's really super critical that you have that ability to trace everything through and it's not a black box. This is a really, by the way, I think this is something super important that you can take away. Not as, to be negative because it's, we want to be positive about these things, but these are really good things to make sure that as you're talking to vendors that you're making sure they address these points.
I
Ben.
I do not have very much to add there, Dan. I actually agree with all of that. So it's not just you. But I'll just note too on the black box point. I also would suggest really kind of pushing on the performance testing and understanding what the SLAs are for, AI accounting products. Like how long will it take to do this processing? How do you respond at scale and at high volume? I feel that a lot of the legacy solutions are more tested in that space, but I don't always feel that that gets enough airtime when people are evaluating products. So I highly recommend that as well.
All
Okay,
right.
Tierney, I feel your angst for me to move
No,
quickly on a couple slides. And I can
no
because this
worries.
isn't this isn't a cybersecurity presentation. I've been CFO of three cybersecurity companies. It really was, and I appreciate and they were going to do it anyway, but Numeric taking and adding a couple slides in here around this. This is an unproven area. I watch the cybersecurity space a lot. I'm not an IT guy or an analyst or anything, but I'm just watching the number of companies that are getting funded in this area. It is clearly an area where there is not a lot of technology that can handle things like I'll call them middleware agents that are going across systems. I know these are things that exist and Google has them, etc. But there is really no security for those agents today, and so IT function is going to be really. I can't speak for them, but I'm fairly certain they're going to be pretty concerned about deploying these things in the wild until there's really a way to monitor them and have a security program and a security posture around that. So that's really the point of this. But the second point is just sort of an interesting one. I'd be interested in other people's opinions. It sort of feels like privacy back in the mid 2000s when everybody was trying to retain their privacy, and we've all given up on that. There is no privacy, and so I sort of wonder. I'm sure others have deeper thoughts on this, and there's probably been zillions of panels on it. But in terms of, I think at some point, in a very safe way, I think data is going to be needed to be used to train models to make the models better. If we don't do that, but Ben, you're more technical than me and a product guy. Do you have thoughts on this second point?
Yeah, I think you see a lot in corporate deployments, kind of use of embedded AI where it's actually not allowed to train or retain certain of the information, which I think is ultimately a good thing, but also kind of plays into where some of these implementations lose ROI because you're not getting that kind of iterative learning function out of the AI. So it's sort of a trade-off. Like you can somewhat limit the amount of data retention and training. But on the flip side of that, that means your, updates to the LLM are going to come with new versions versus as it does the work. So, that's kind of what I've noticed so far.
Awesome. So this is really a takeaway slide for everybody. I'm not going to really present it. It really was just a framework. Again, McKinsey came out with this maybe 2 weeks ago or so, and it's obviously a very credible resource around just some very basic principles, kind of first principles around trust in your environment. And look, I think the one thing back to that sort of Stanford study and Berkeley study I referenced earlier, that second one from the left, which is put humans at the center, is I don't think any of us are planning to go without that one anytime soon because it's therefore, obviously more trustable. I think Ben, you made a really good point though. Humans still make mistakes, so it's never going to be perfect. But everything that's been deployed to date, again, according to the survey, is fairly simple steps in terms of 10 or less, but and a lots of human involvement. We talked about transparency. Again, I'm not going to go over all of this, but I thought it was a good takeaway, sort of bird's eye view of maybe as you think through trust and you think through your vendors, some first principles along those lines.
All right. Uh, don't think we need to hit on this because it's probably a through line, but if you haven't already heard that it all starts with great data, this is your reminder. Well, we're going to recap or we're going to wrap up with one more quick round between Dan and Ben about what's coming in the future. Because I think we've talked a lot about limitations that exist, constraints that exist. Those are obviously dynamic. What is not possible today may well be possible in the future. So, Ben, we'll start with you and then we'll turn to Dan on how Numeric thinks about what will the next 5, 10 years look like as AI advances and the field shifts.
Yeah, I think, especially for the early adopters, people are going to have to be, you know, you can use AI to assist with your technical accounting research, But at the end of the day, it is going to be you, the human, who implements the policy and takes ownership of it. And so, I've experimented with AI and technical accounting, and it's quite impressive and can be pretty good. But there's like, a 10 to 15% error rate there. And so you have to know what to catch. And I actually kind of like to use it in the inverse as a completeness check versus, the thing that I start with. And I'll note also that we kind of have an established process from like a SOX framework for where and how you're allowed to rely on systems, what kind of testing your IT team needs to do, what kind of testing your auditors are going to do. But there's this huge, revolution that's going to be happening, I think, on the audit point, where the new accountant is going to have to understand what options are available to validate these systems, how to do so more efficiently. And to partner really closely when you're doing your process and context engineering and your systems thinking to really partner with the Big Four and understand what they're looking for, where we need to meet in the middle, and to ensure that kind of compliance coverage. Um, and otherwise, from there, assuming you do achieve like an AI informed, you know, mostly automated accounting system, understanding the outputs of that system, being able to speak to them strategically, being a cross-functional business partner with the teams who are also looking at this, be that FP&A or sales finance or pricing, and also having an eye towards the future and understanding what's new, what's next for my business, how am I going to have to operationalize this and enable it in our setup. And so it's less reactive, I think, and more proactive looking towards the next thing versus playing catch up 24/7. That's certainly my hope.
All right. And maybe a recap of what does this person really become in terms of their job?
Yeah. So, in a simple sense, instead of being the person, preparing monthly spreadsheets by the dozens, maybe even by the hundreds, depending on your business. And again, like engaging in manual journal entries, playing catch up, trying to just survive the next close. I really think people are going to take more of a process and systems view of things, given that that work will be automated. And so you'll have more of a say in how the business operates as like from like an architectural standpoint. But also with an eye towards tools, I think that enable the business. I think still something people run into is I have to conform my operations to the capabilities of the tool I've selected. I think we might start to move more towards the direction of tools being able to enable things that people want to do in their business, which, previously were breaking accounting and finance capability. So I think we might also see some more flexibility there as well.
All right. I'm gonna skip past this because I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, but have a slide on what this looks like in practice. We'll definitely share it for folks afterwards. So turn it over to you, Dan. How do you think about what remains true in the future? What's changing?
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of duh slide, but at the same time, it is actually sort of the most important one. I mean, like I'm guessing many of you are, and I'm sure Numeric, hiring a lot of people. So I've hired a ton of people in my career. So I arguably used to spend more time on the technical skills, and I certainly will. But more it's about certainly attitude. Network is super important, ability to tap into a network and find out how other people are doing things, for example, which is not going to be AI. And then curiosity, right? So, but ultimately, that curiosity is really what I look for is for people that really want to understand our business. They want to understand how it works. And again, when you get into the complexity of the models that are going on today, somebody that can just process that complexity, again, not down to the transaction level, but really at a business level, thinking about how that affects unit economics, how that affects SaaS metrics around go-to-market or whatever it may be that are super important at a bigger level. And that is kind of maybe the overall point. And I think everybody's made this already. The days of the clerk, I think probably are, the pure clerk are probably going away. And those people are going to up level, and then the people above them will up level, and I guess even people like me at the CFO level have to up level. And that everyone's going to get better at their game and become more strategic. And I think this idea of, $100 million companies, one person, those kinds of things, and there will always be exceptions, I suppose, but that's, in my view, not good because I don't have enough people sitting around that understand the business so that if that person ever goes away, the agents aren't going to run my business because they don't know my business. They know what they know. I need people that can really understand and understand the the inputs that are outside of our data systems that can then that affect our business. So anyway, thank you for putting this slide in, Tierney.
Yeah, totally. And then maybe anything, Dan, here that you want to hit on in addition on the RightRev perspective.
I think we're good. I've touched on all of
Great.
this. I think the only thing I would add here is real time. More and more of this is moving to real time, and that is super important. Always been important, right? Been doing this for a little while, but now it's more achievable. I think the one-day close. I think Numeric may talk about it. Others certainly talk about it. That's great. Super important to be able to close the books and move on to more value add stuff, but more for us in our world, the ability to sort of see how revenue is tracking, and I mean revenue. I don't mean sort of bookings and those kinds of things, the actual complexity and actually seeing, importantly, sort of gross margin and unit economics, seeing that in real time and helping CFOs do that. So it's not 2 weeks after, boy, I got a week to go before, or 2 weeks to go before the earnings call. I got to figure out what's going on for the public companies. Getting that sooner and near real time is certainly going to be fine. That's probably the big thing to take away from this slide.
Great. All right. So with that, we've covered a lot. We're going to open it up to Q&A. So you can either one post it in the chat, or there is actually a Q&A section that folks can go ahead. And it looks like we do actually already have one question in. So we'll start there. Then I have a couple prepared as folks going at their own. So we have our first question from Sandra, who said suggestions on convincing CFOs that it is worthwhile to experiment and automate the work that Ben is talking about, re-empowering accountants to become architects. So, Dan and Ben, advice for a CFOs and convincing them.
Dan, I think you should take this one first. Yeah, give that experience.
Are you sure? No, I want you to go first, bud.
You sure?
Yeah.
Uh, okay. Well, I guess I would say that, framing is really important, right? So, what cost am I going to avert with this automation? How much headcount maybe might I be reducing by bringing on one of these systems and making this upfront investment? Being able to show a bit of ownership and understanding of, where the trade-offs are, where this could go wrong, what risks am I bringing on as well, and why are they worth it? I can say in my own case, having worked on some accounting automation projects, um, some of those onboardings happened as things were getting dire. I think it's a really interesting possibility to try to surface these ideas before the team gets overloaded and kind of show some of that forward-looking understanding of where the business is going, where things are going to start to break down, and how you're actually just going to avert that pain altogether versus have to respond to it later.
I think that's right. The days of I mean, ROI calculators are helpful. I don't think anybody really puts a lot of weight behind them. I think it's really going to be more, how do you help my business grow? The thing we tell everyone is, again, it's along the monetization lines, is turning the CFO into a growth catalyst. Every CFO, including myself, obviously we're holding people's feet to the fire around spending and whatnot, but ultimately what we're trying to do is grow. And if we have to in the back office say no because we don't have the systems, process, skill set, automation to support high scale or just really any level of growth, then we're really kind of being schizophrenic at that point. Is really we're saying, hey, everybody, we got to grow and we got to be efficient, and we're not supporting them. And so I think translating that say-do of we want to help you be a growth catalyst with our tools, I think is really the best way to approach it and really get as specific as you can. And that takes time. We tell all of our sales reps and to really get into the business, don't just come in there and do the generic thing. See how they make money, see how complex they are, and really be able to translate that to the stakeholders. So whether it's the CFO or otherwise, but I think it's really that turning and really supporting the CFOs today who are much more front office and back office is helping them be a growth catalyst.
Absolutely. And I think before we get to our next question, Kurt's comment actually earlier about the start small, I think is another really good point of can you show those quick wins to be able to then go experiment for a larger, more critical process too. All right. Thank you, Sandra, so much for the thoughtful question. All right. We have our next question from Yale, which is where do you see the future for medium large enterprise companies? Self-built agents for a specific use case or software implementation with AI features? This is a very good question that at least at Numeric, we spend a lot of time thinking about. Uh, Ben or Dan, either of you really
I
excited?
love this. I'm going to go first because I'll make it quick, which is
Yeah.
extensibility. So, and I'm guessing Ben will do a better job of this, but this is how we're thinking about it, which is we're going to have all sorts of pre-built, very specific. I like to start small, but I think it's even different than start small. It's really kind of really specific tasks, but that they're extensible, and that you can modify them for your particular use case, and that's important. For use in the wild, for mid-market all the way up through the largest of large enterprises. And for us, just for our business model, we work with the big four, we work with all the big SIs. It also allows them to drive professional services revenue, which is a whole nother thing, but it is super important that they can get in there and do more with your system as opposed to writing scripts. They're taking an existing agent, modifying it, configuring it a bit, and then moving it forward. So it's about extensibility. That's how I'd answer that.
No, that I don't have a ton to add there. I think that's pretty spot on.
All right. Our next question from Stort. Numeric has excellent flex analysis AI tools and monitors. Thank you, Stort. Do you see RightRev, so question to Dan, developing AI tools to cover that side of things rather than technical RevRec, which needs more deterministic AI? So maybe Dan to hint on maybe some of the things that you're comfortable talking about with the future of the product and sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Real quick, no, we're never going to move anywhere near that. We're actually not even going to move up into billing and CPQ, which you would think, what's tangential? That's what you're always doing in these companies, right? How can we increase our TAM? We're going to stay, we're the revenue company, and we're
Mhm.
going to do things upstream and downstream from revenue. We've got a big partner in Salesforce that has CPQ and billing, and we have a whole bunch of other partners that have that as well. We don't need to do that. We've already, our founder and genius Joggin has already talked about moving into the forecasting area. And when I talk about forecasting, it's super cool, right? It brings in other stakeholder FP&A into the process, but it's not just, I was at Fastly and you can figure out when you're going to have seasonality, right? That's kind of easy to forecast. It's also not a subscription where you can do out you kind of just do the waterfall for all the stuff that's committed. Those are table stakes today. It's really again, on a complex, if you got a simple offering, it's not as helpful. But if you've got a complex offering, and let's say you are one of these AI companies that's selling credits. Well, the way this works is super complicated, but essentially, instead of set it, forget it on the allocations of each of the elements in that contract, say, 20, 10, 15, whatever, that can change not just once during the contract life, it can actually change monthly, which is all as a result of the fact that you are changing the discount in each period based upon the usage. Sorry, I geeked out for a second, but that is a use case that probably didn't exist terribly much until fairly recently, is in the last year. And that's really where this is all going, is the ability to handle those kinds of things. So I think we're always going to stay in revenue, in and around revenue, but the ability to forecast is one specific example of where we're moving the product.
Awesome. All right. Well, that wraps up the questions that we have. If any more are coming, I'll keep my eye on the Q&A. But we are wrapping up in terms of it's 10:58 over here in San Francisco. So one, I want to first thank Dan and Ben for sharing some of your perspectives, helping us chart through the level of chaos that is the current AI sphere, and trying to get to some principles about how accounting teams can go think about this. Also want to thank anyone who sat in, asked questions, thought deeply with Dan and Ben about how this relates to your own team. And we'll be sending both one, a copy of these slides, and then two, a couple resources from both the RightRev team and Numeric on other further reading. We'll also include Dan's probably 5 different studies that he mentioned. So if you want some weekend plans, we got you covered for deep diving into AI material. And again, really appreciate it if you want to respond and give us feedback on how we can make these even better, even more helpful. Our team always cares deeply about that. So thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
All
you.
right. See y'all.
Bye.